Okay, welcome everybody to the MCT Parent Support Programme. This is the first session with Judy Murray for Judy Murray's Parents Corner. Big welcome to you, Judy.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Today's topic, we're going to be delving into a little bit of Judy's opinions, Judy's experiences on nurturing competitors, linking back to obviously Jamie and Andy's early days, and also Judy's opinions on that stage of development for young kids. The program is geared towards supporting parents of kids at between the age of 6 to 11 years old. So we'll kind of focus in and around that sort of subject area. So Judy, firstly, I wonder if you could just give us a brief overview of when Jamie and Andy were sort of age 5, 6, 7 years old, when they were first getting into sport more broadly, not just tennis. What sort of things they were doing, what sort of sports they were trying. Was it kind of a case of doing a bit of everything across the board at that sort of age?
Yeah, very much so. I think because I was very sporty, I loved a number of sports. I did pretty much every sport I could do when I was at school. And badminton and tennis were the two that I ended up kind of focusing on. But when the boys were small, I wanted them to have the chance to try lots of different sports. And what tends to happen is that kids between the age of 8 and 10, they'll start to narrow down the ones that they enjoy the most for whatever reason. And it might be the ones that they're best at. It might be the ones that their friends go to. It might be the ones that they get the most satisfaction or enjoyment out of. It might be that they like the environment. It could be all sorts of reasons, but they usually narrow it down between the ages of 8 and 10. So when my two were between 5 and 7, they pretty much went swimming once a week, but it was usually for the water slides. It wasn't for the swimming up and down and doing lengths and things. It was a fun thing to do with their friends. But they also did mini rugby, mini football. They were at the tennis club a lot, as you can imagine, because I was coaching. I was, for the most part, a volunteer coach at our local club, but we had built up a really wonderful community club that had all sorts of activity going on. It wasn't just tennis. The golf club was next door. There was a park on the other side where they played football and cricket and so forth. Yeah. There were squash courts, table tennis courts. There were always water bomb fights or treasure hunts. And really think that having a wonderful community environment that was safe and loads of different activity, loads of kids, boys and girls of all different ages and stages, and lots of adult volunteer helpers, which was mostly the mums. I think that had a huge impact on how much time they wanted to spend around that place. So although the focus was the tennis club, it was very much more than just a tennis club. And I always knew, I think from my own experience, that playing lots of different sports can really help you, not just to develop the physical skills, but the social skills, the leadership skills, the life skills, the camaraderie. So, my two tried pretty much everything. The other thing they did when they were a little bit smaller than that was tumble tots, the sort of fun gymnastics type thing, which they absolutely loved. And they both went to Cubs. And the thing that they loved the most about Cubs was all the, British Bulldog and dodgeball and all the things that you did as a big gang of kids. So yeah. I can't emphasize enough the importance of encouraging your kids or booking your kids in to do as many different things as you possibly can at that young age.
Yeah, I mean, agree. That was my experience as a kid at the local tennis club. My mother was a good squash player and fiercely competitive. So we were at the tennis club most of the day, and it was bulldog, it was squash, it was tennis, it was racquetball, hitting against the walls, just I suppose exploring physical movement. So, the social element, as you say, and I think certainly from my experience, the competitive side, I still love competing to this day. The very process of it, I love it. And I think I would put it down to my mother, certainly a lot of it, but also that interaction early on at the tennis club with older kids, younger kids. It was brilliant. And I think we don't see that as much, I suppose, in these current times with tennis clubs, tennis tournaments, and lots of sports. I think it tends to be a more defined start time, finish time, which has its pros, obviously has its pluses, but also there's some negatives to that the kids don't experience that breadth of activity that you just described.
Yes, I would agree with that. It seems to me that nowadays it's more the norm for kids to be programmed into activity from an early age, and they get dropped off at 4, picked up at 5, for example, and they don't hang about the club in the way that we used to, or that my kids used to when they were growing up. I'd love to see more of that coming back. This sort of not just falling in love with the sport, but falling in love with the environment, the whole community club thing. And I think, you know, when you start to talk about competition, when Jamie and Andy were I think Andy was almost 6 and Jamie had maybe just turned 7. And in those days, there was no red, orange and green ball. They played on the full court with a proper tennis ball. And Andy played double-handed on both sides, as little kids often did, you know, from a strength point of view. But there were no competitions back then for them. They could keep the score. They could play in the full court in their own little way. And the competitions in our area were under 12 and under 14. And I thought, you know, it's going to be years before they're going to be able to actually play in something. And they were desperate to do what the older kids were doing or what they saw on the TV. And really, I thought, okay, well, let's just create an under 10 competition. And I called up a number of coaches that I knew from around the country and said, right, I'm going to do this. And the thing is, with me having had a competitive tennis background, I knew how competitions worked. And of course you can create your own formats if you're just doing it kind of ad hoc. It's not part of some kind of system or needing to be accredited, for example. And so we created little round robin groups. The older kids at the club umpired for all these little kids that came down from all across the country. And the remit of the older child who was umpiring was that when they finished their set, we actually did 1st to 6. So it could have been 6-5. We didn't do any tie breaks or anything like that. But the teenager who was umpiring had to just collect the score. How many games did you win there? 5 or 6, if it was 6-5, and take them off to play French cricket or a water balloon fight or football or whatever it was. It was take them off and play something with them. You know, we had board games as well, drafts, we had table tennis, we had racquetball. There's all sorts of things going on. And that really came from my experience of observing children becoming very upset when they lost, and also parents sometimes becoming upset when their child lost, or seeing their children upset, which is perfectly natural. And so I just created this whole thing where whoever won it didn't matter. It's like if you lost 6-2, you got 2 points and you added up your points at the end. And if you hit a certain number of points at the end, you got a certain prize. And it might have just been a tiny little chocolate bar. There was something for everyone. But the point was, you need to create an environment where kids can learn to compete, but where they feel comfortable and safe and encouraged and relaxed. And I think we did that. And if I look back at that competition, there was Jamie and Andy played in it. Jamie Baker, who went on to play Davis Cup for Great Britain, Colin Fleming, who also played Davis Cup, top 30 doubles player, and Elena Baltasha. It was her first proper tennis competition. And prior to that, she'd been playing sponge ball tennis, which was called short tennis in those days. So I think I think what that did was it set the other coaches off to creating some under 10 events in their backyards, and thus in time became an under 10 circuit. But if I was doing it again, I would start in exactly the same way. No rankings, no ratings, no whatever, just, really relaxed, fun, sociable, make lots of friends. And we had a cafe going in the club, of course, with hot dogs and ice cream, all the things that kids like. And that's what I would like us to be able to showcase our sport in the early stages of competition, not just for the kids, but for the parents as well, that it's a fun afternoon out or morning out or whatever it is. So, so my kids came up through that kind of setup, and it really doesn't surprise me why they came to love the sport so much and why they still love the sport, because the environment created it. And I think the other thing to say on the competitive side was that when they were 7 and 8, they were very, very good for their age. And in those days, because there was no red, orange and green ball, they were able to play in under 10 events and under 12 events. And they also played at age 8 and 9, they played in the men's third team at our club. So it's all doubles. They played, each of them played with a very much older guy, probably in his 60s, but they learned to socialize with older people. They learned to play against all sorts of different quirky styles and heights and all the rest of it. Whereas now, if I look at competition for kids, you're pocketed into age groups from a very early age. And if you move through those age groups, you move with the same kids. And
Yes,
eventually that becomes very stale. So I'm very glad that my kids are not learning how to compete right now with the format that's around it, because I just think it's a bit too serious too soon and too restrictive.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, again, a lot of what you described there mirrors my experience as a kid. Kind of remember with James Auckland, actually, the free play element that we'd go and play best of 5 set matches, have a box of flapjacks in the rain under the lights at the age of 9 and 10, and you know, we absolutely loved it. That kind of 2.5, 3 hour battle at the age of 9 and 10 with a yellow ball, having just come out of short tennis, the same sort of experience really. And you know, as you described, I played in adult leagues and team matches with adults when I was 11, 12, and I think the skill development that comes with that, the social interaction that you talked about as well, that I suppose dealing with different sorts of opponents, that it naturally develops skills that, you know, if I'm always playing a like level player of the same age, I may not have to explore those same skills. And I think it's what drew me to, I suppose, that the UTR and now the WTN, the level-based element is, you know, the very first tournament I ran, I had a 11-year-old girl playing a 71-year-old man, and you know, it kind of was the story of this format, where they had a humdinger of a match, 12-10 in the champ tiebreak, and I think we could do more of that, really, as you say. I suppose just you touched on, you know, at the age of 6 and 7, the boys were already quite good. Do you think that is by virtue of the multi-skill element, the multi-sport element? They were doing a little bit of everything. That kind of, I suppose, that early success or early progress, as it were. Do you think that was down to volume of hours on the court with you as a tennis player, tennis coach, or I suppose having explored across the board different sports?
Yeah, I think definitely developing really good hand-eye and foot-eye coordination at a young age by having sporty parents and sporty grandparents and playing, you know, playing actively with them, whatever they wanted to play, in the garden or at the park, or sometimes it was down tennis courts. But, you know, it didn't matter whether it was, you know, football or badminton over the washing line. We were always playing actively because it was just what we enjoyed doing. So I think when you develop good physical skills at a young age, they're the same skills that underpin all sports. So they stand you in good stead, and really they can be developed without any coaching. They can be developed with parents or older siblings playing actively on a regular basis, you know, outside, inside, whatever it is. Because if you think back, I mean, I got to quite a good level of tennis, considering that I was never coached. There was no such things as tennis coaches in Scotland when I was young. So you learn to play the game by playing with the older kids at the club first, and then when you were good enough, by playing with the adults. And I was lucky that my mum and dad were both pretty good players. They were both captains of the North of Scotland County. That doesn't mean they were coaches. It doesn't mean they were brilliant players, but I learned by playing with them and against them and watching them. So I learned to play the game by playing the game. And I think that's why I'm, you know, nowadays I worry about overcoaching, that the coaching has become the activity rather than the playing of the game. And I see many, many more kids, I think, being coached, and less kids actually playing the game. So I think for my two, you know, getting good at a young age was probably a mix of those, doing lots of different sports, developing good hand-eye and foot-eye at a young age, but also having parents and grandparents and loads of other kids at the club who were happy to play with them whenever they wanted to play. But I have to stress that it wasn't like they did loads of more tennis than any other sport. You know, Andy played just as much football as tennis until he was about 14, and Jamie had a 3 handicap at golf when he was 15, and he plays golf right-handed. Yeah. And he's left-handed in everything else. So this what my point about developing the skills first. And I have a saying that I say all the time is, you know, focus on the skills before you focus on the drills. So, you know, and those skills can be developed in a very relaxed way simply by playing actively on a regular basis.
Yeah. Just I suppose delving into a little bit of I mean, both boys clearly very, very competitive. They have to be to have had the success in later life that they have had. You know, that sort of nature nurture. You know, I like to think of it as nature via nurture, the two interacting. Would you say, you know, the boys both obviously very different as well, having had the success they've had? You know, that balance of naturally who they were as young boys at age 6, 7, 8, and going through the age groups. You know, the differences between them, but also the environment that we've just talked about there. How much of each of those things do you think were at play?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it's something that I really thought of at the time. I just think that if you have a good environment, you know, whether that's a home environment where you've got parents who love sport, who encourage you and who play with you, whatever that sport is, or a mixture of sport, is an incredible plus. And, you know, nowadays, I mean, in my day, it was more the way of the world that the dad worked and the mum was the homemaker. So, you know, but nowadays it's often the case where both parents work. So there's more money, but there's less time, and you pay other people to do a lot of these after school or weekend activities with your kids rather than, you know, you're doing them all yourself. But I think, I'm not saying that the boys did loads and loads of hours of tennis in those very early years. They didn't. But, you know, it is a very complex coordination sport. So therefore, if you invest in those physical skills, balance, agility, coordination, at a young age, they will serve you well, you know, much further down the line, rather than sticking to perhaps one sport from a very young age and becoming a little bit one-dimensional. But by doing so, you know, and they both loved competing. I think maybe because we watched a lot of sport on TV, they always wanted to do what they saw on TV. So we tried to recreate it in the backyard or in the garden, you know, whether that was the open golf or the WWF wrestling, you know, they would create that with duvets and things in their bedroom. But I think that's the curiosity and the imagination all coming into play. As well. But in terms of, you know, being competitive, they were only 15 months apart, so they were always competitive with each other. That is not uncommon. You know, whether that was drafts or Monopoly or balloon tennis, you know, whatever it was, they always had somebody to spar with, and they became very good at creating their own competitions, so their own rules, their own scoring systems. And that would probably take you and I back to like your 5-setter with James Auckland, or me hanging out at the tennis club, you know, back in the day, all day. You went home when you were hungry, and you created handicap type systems so that you had even matches. And that's one of the advantages of golf, you know, having a handicap system, that everybody can play in the same competition and have a shot at it. You know, in tennis, those handicap events used to see loads of them around, you know, over the years, and they have largely disappeared. You know, when you start with a 30 love start or a minus 30 love start, and they are great ways to learn resilience and to level things up. Because if I wanted to play with my best friend, I was much better than her, so I had to start at minus 40 and she would start at 30. But that really taught me how to concentrate on the first, you know, you had to get those first 5 points to give yourself a chance to actually win the game. And that requires consistency and concentration. So I'm just a huge believer in that, really experimenting with different formats to develop different skills, mental as well as physical or tactical, that you require to become a good tennis player.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think you're talking about, I suppose, the qualities, the characteristics, the resilience, all of that kind of dealing with adversity. Do you think, I suppose it's, we talk about big picture mentality as a coach, I talk about it a lot, and as a parent, I suppose, having gone through the sport, I can look at it pragmatically. Would you say, the importance of skills that you're very clear on now, would you say even going back to when the boys were that age, it was a conscious awareness, I suppose, of the importance of skills even then? Or is that something that has evolved having seen them develop?
I think I was aware of it, probably from what my parents had done with me, that allowed me to become competent in a number of sports. So whatever I had the opportunity to try at school, or even when I went to university, I was going to be able to be decent at it because I could do all the running, jumping, throwing, catching, left side, right side, all of those things, rhythm and timing, speed off the mark. They all came with trying lots of different sports when I was much younger. So I think I was aware of it. But I wasn't, when the boys were small, I was a volunteer at our club. I started off on 2 hours a week when they were toddlers, just to get myself out of the house and to give me something to do. And I wasn't a coach. I was just somebody who loved the game, played the game well, and wanted a bit of fresh air and a bit of respite, I suppose, from 2 very overactive toddlers. And I learned a lot about how children learn from observing my own children at play. And I think I took a lot of that over the years, because you don't become a great coach or a great skill developer by reading a book. You actually have to spend a lot of time experimenting with things, observing, listening. But the thing was, I knew very well what tennis would demand of all the kids that came my way. And because I'd never been taught technically, I taught from a tactical base. So I taught them how to play the game. And therefore I created situations where they put the opposition in trouble. This is all about putting your opponent in trouble. So of course, the most simple thing is you make them run. Yes, you can make them run side to side, but you can make them run up and back as well. So teaching them the drop shot and the lob, as well as the short angles and the deep loops, etc., etc. But I wasn't a technical coach. And I think what I see now more is there's more technical coaching and focus on that sort of side of things. And of course, you need to be technically competent to become a very good player. But I think that being able to play the game at a young age is more important, because you can learn the techniques more easily actually as you get older. So I think when I'm working with kids who are very young, I don't care what the shape of the shot is. I want them to be able to bump the ball to a partner, because then they feel like they're playing the game. And everything that I do coaching wise, it's never about the coach throwing a ball or hitting a ball to a line of 8 kids. This is about the kids playing in pairs, because that's what the game demands. You have to play with someone else. So you have to learn how to bump it, even if it's just a little, it doesn't look like a particularly wonderful tennis shot at all, but they are playing the game, and you build confidence through that success. And as they get better and better at that, then you can start to develop a little bit more of the shape to the shots. But that's really been my philosophy all along, is the developing the skills first, the physical skills that you need to be able to play the game, and then ensuring that that you develop enough variety in players, that they can change the pace, the height, the depth, the spin of the ball, that they can slice, they can drop shot, they can dink, they can overhead, they can do everything. Because if you don't invest in that, then they fall short further down the line. It's much harder to add these things in when they become, later on in their teens. So yeah, it takes a long time to develop your philosophy as a coach. And, I went down a lot of wrong routes by at one time becoming over technical, because I went on a course, actually my last qualification that I did, and it was the biomechanical part of that was incredibly technical, and I didn't understand a lot of it, but I tried to learn it and I tried to pass it on to my players. And then I just thought, this is ridiculous. These are all young teenagers. they don't want to know what inertia is and angular momentum and stuff like that. I need to go back to saying, turn your shoulders more, or whatever it is. You need to talk their language. You need to understand it yourself, but you need to be able to communicate it well to them. So yeah, but for me, the playing of the game is more important than having the perfect technique at the ages that we're talking about, between 6 and 11. Yeah,
for sure. And I think that, we touched on it before, the kind of ratings, rankings. There's a lot of focus on whether it's ratings, rankings specifically, or selection for county training, or selection for teams, that you can often get I think parents can often get waylaid with that being the critical marker of how of course it is a barometer of how their child is doing at 7, 8, 9 years old. But it can sometimes distract, I think, from the very thing you just described there, which is, the exploring new skills, exploring how to make life awkward for an opponent, drop shots, lobs, whatever it might be, that I think the free play element often helps to develop naturally. And where we don't have that free play, and it's about, I think I hear of parents talking about recent form, or it's not ranking, but they're still, kids are still being judged on how many matches they've won and how many matches they've played at the age of 8, which in my view is crazy. And it's kind of what spurred me on to develop the mini challenger tour, is to try and remove that side of it. So it is about fun and about play, and all sorts of levels can interact together with that format, because it does strike me. I see some parents of kids at the age of 11 or 12, and they've had a lot of years of going through that competitive structure that can be quite jading. And I'm not sure, apart from offering more and different opportunities, I'm not sure that it's easy to avoid that with the structures of, like we talked about, the selection. I posted a picture a while ago of the Rover squad. We've had various schemes that is fabulous for the kids that get chosen for those things, but the kids that don't get chosen, and for the parents of those kids, it's quite demoralizing. And I think it's trying to, at that particular age, is make it open, fun, and about development.
Yes, it's very dangerous, I think, to label kids at a young age by badging them up, or making them part of something that has a brand or a name attached to it. That's I'm a big believer in the ages that we're talking about, of the importance of the club environment, club teams, recreational competitions, inter-club fixtures and so forth, and also school competitions, if that was possible. I realize that can be quite tricky now, because I think so many of our state schools have lost their tennis courts over the years. But certainly with with red ball tennis, mini tennis, and even something like pickleball now, which is huge in the States and is played on a badminton court with a kind of it's like a big table tennis bat and a plastic ball that has holes in it but bounces very like a tennis ball. I think these are great ways to learn how to play the game within a school or a community centre environment, because nearly all of them have got badminton courts. So I'm really in favour of that as well. But yeah, I think it's getting the right kind of competition that has that mix of levels, of course, is inclusive of as many kids as possible, that doesn't put a label or a badge on them. I like the idea very much behind the Mini Challenger Tour of mixing round robin groups where you can play singles, but where you then become part of a team depending on where you finished up in your round robin group. You go into a team type situation where everybody who was third in their group becomes a team, for example, or competes against each other. There's lots of different ways that it can be done, but I think creating that fun environment, play lots of different matches and short matches, I think is really important, because kids don't have the concentration level at that young age. And if it's a mismatch, whether you're too good or you're getting smoked, it doesn't last for too long, and therefore it doesn't hurt. And then you're back into the right. You come off, and you're gonna go on again, and then the next stage is this, and now you're in this team. I think having seen one of them in action when you trialed it up in Scotland, I could see how that is it's just a more relaxed, encouraging, inclusive format, not just for the kids, I think for the parents as well, to see the interaction of lots of different matches and the fun of supporting your teammates or, you know, whoever else happens to be in your group. And then of course, you know, at the end of it, having the little session that we did for the parents, so showing them lots of things, on court things that they could do at home with, you know, I don't know, balloons and simple things where they can help them to develop skills that they need for tennis away from the tennis court. And I think that's gold dust, because many parents, especially those who don't play at all, they think they can't help their kids because they didn't play, and therefore does tennis then become expensive for them, because they then feel like they need to find a coach. Coaching can be expensive, especially individual lessons. So I think that support for parents, in my opinion, when you're starting out, is absolutely invaluable. And there's so many little gems that are very simple. And I think when we did that first one, the number of parents who came up to me afterwards and said, oh, that was so simple, and we could do that at home. We've got that at home. Or it's not like you need to go out and buy lots of new stuff. You know, you've got rolled up socks or, you know, whatever it is, all the different things that we were using. But it is letting parents understand what's important at each stage of the journey and how they can contribute. And it's not, right, you've given your child over to a coach and now it's over to the coach and you can't really do anything other than run them to their lesson and so forth. So I think I understand probably as well as anybody else how in an individual sport like tennis, the onus is on the parents to make it all happen. And therefore it makes complete common sense that the more you invest in helping parents to understand the stage of the journey and what the next stage is, the more they can help their kids, and the more it becomes that kind of triangle that's so important, the parent, the coach, and the player. Because if you get that right and everybody plays their part well and feels, you know, completely part of it and enjoying it, it works out so much better for the child at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the what you just said, I suppose, is the exact aim, that the event itself, that's showing parents, trying to support parents in how they support their kids. And it's the same kind of objective of these workshops as well, is to try and get down to some of the topics that, you know, the challenges that parents have to deal with week by week, as they, you know, often you go into a sport like tennis or any other sport, and parents are often expected to know which way to turn and how to do X or Y or Z, and it's difficult, and you know, particularly with so much more choice out there, it's difficult to know exactly what to do and what's important as well. And I think the point you made on, I suppose, a question that comes up in my mind is that, you know, what's important at different ages and stages, and going back to that point of, you know, exploring skills and developing game awareness and that side of things, and kind of the objectives of the mini challenger tour, I suppose, getting away from rankings, ratings, selection, all of that side of things. There's no doubt, there's no escaping from the fact that tennis, you know, you have two world #1 sons that, you know, professionally that they've gone on to be the very best in the world. At what age stage do you think that side of things becomes, I suppose, a real objective, real goal? Is it, you know, is it as young as, you know, 12, 13, 14, or is it later than that when rankings and ratings really matter? Or do you think they never really matter?
I think you need some kind of ranking or rating system. There's always been one. It's just different now from, you know, when I played. You need something in order to categorize people and to show progress. But I think when you stack everything towards winning at a young age, it's too easy to chase after something and forget about all those developmental steps that you need, or skills that you need to build in that will serve you well for the longer term. And I also think it, you know, it brings a pressure. So everything that I said about labelling. I completely will always stand by that. The minute you put a label on a child, you bring pressure. You don't just bring it to the child. They might not understand that at first. When they get picked for something, they'd be excited, but you also bring a pressure with the parents, because once you get picked for something, you can only get chucked out of it. You stay in it, or you get out of it. And you see it in football all the time, with all the young footballers that get signed up to the academies, and then hardly any of them make it, and it's devastating. But who's there to help you when you drop off? And I noticed that I think it was Bayern Munich, it was probably about a year ago, I read an article that they said that they were stopping all their under 9 and under 10 squads at Bayern Munich because of the labelling and the pressure that came with it. And that they realized that when you're 9 and 10, you should be playing in your local clubs, for your local school team, your local club team, and enjoying it and playing freely and experiencing the joy, rather than the pressure of, I'm in Bayern Munich and everybody's pointing a finger at me or criticizing me if I'm not playing well, and so forth. And they decided to stop it. And I read that and I was like, yeah, you see, that is common sense for me. So really, I feel like we should be trying to invest much more in creating great club environments with great competitive in-house programs, cross schools, cross clubs within the local area. Because if we can stack the numbers better locally with imaginative recreational competition, we will retain a lot more, we'll encourage and retain a lot more kids and a lot more parents within our sport. Because the way that it is at the moment, that if you outgrow the competition in your own area, you have to travel, and that probably happens at quite a young age now, because there's just not enough competitive young tennis players around. And as soon as you have to travel, that brings in huge time commitment from the parents, and it brings in expense as well. So to create a really great culture of competitive tennis for young players, for me, it's all about what can be done locally. So we need to try to encourage clubs and the coaches within the clubs to understand that that is an incredibly important part of the big picture offering around the age 6 to 11 is actually the competitive framework. So I think that what you've set up with the Mini Challenger Tour is a great way to make that happen. It caters for biggish numbers, mixed ability, and it offers individual competition and team competition all in one package. And I'd love to see many clubs and coaches adopting that, rather than putting on another training session. Let's put on a little fun competition and then have pizza and ice cream afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think it's a challenge that I have questions coming in about the tournaments at the moment. Does it count towards LTA rating, and do they get submitted? I'm like, no, they don't. They go nowhere near that. And I think again, it comes back to the objectives of this is to show that it can be different. It doesn't need to be about the number by your name or how many wins you get. But it's that is my ambition with the wider project is to show how much fun competition can be, and how as a parent myself, if my daughter comes out of karate, my daughters do all sorts of different activities, and my question is, did you enjoy it? Always, and some of it's competition, some of it's barometer testing with karate and belts and things like that. But as a parent, if I know my daughter is having a great time, job done. I'm happy to hand over the money, and that's it. And I think parents in tennis, sometimes you say, look, does your son, daughter look like they're having a good time? No, they hate it. They just hate competing. And that saddens me. As someone who loves it so much at the age of 25 as I am now, it saddens me to hear that. And that, I think it has to be fun, and for parents to be involved in that, seeing their kid on a court and mixing and integrating with other, interacting with their teammates. As a parent myself, it would fill me up to see that, and that's my hope with it, really.
Yeah, I do think it's also, I hope that that many of the parents who are watching this might see that if they were to create a parent network locally, you could run your own competitions. You could run your own little club teams and so forth, and just keeping it relaxed and creating competition that doesn't bring pressure, that isn't focused entirely on an outcome, i.e. you win or you lose. I think that, you know, if I look back to when the boys were young, the competitions, I mean, we had primary school teams, secondary school teams, locally we had in time as many teams as we could in the different age groups in the local leagues, but it was all done with a parent army. You know, I was doing some of the coaching, but it was all the parents. I just showed them what to do, and you know, whether it was running the cafe or whether it was putting a little piece in the local paper or whether it was actually transport, you were managing the transport for. But they all got behind it because, you know, generally speaking, nobody wants things to happen more for their kids than the parents do. And sometimes it's a question of not waiting for somebody else to do it, i.e. the club or the coach, but actually getting off your butt and saying, right, let's make something happen here. And if you can get a group of you, just as you would do with a car share to school or something, you can actually operate these kind of opportunities yourself. And yeah, I would be a huge advocate of that, because it's not that everything has to be done by the book or by the, well, here's what's an accredited thing, it's not on the list or whatever. I definitely, if I was starting again, I would definitely go back to creating my own imaginative fun. And I think I understand the demands of the game. I understand how kids learn, and I understand the importance of it being fun, and that it's a long journey. And if you get it right at the start, you will keep them in for the long haul. If you get it wrong at the start, they've fallen by the wayside at 10 or 11.
Well, yeah, that you hit the nail on the head there. It's kind of writing something to do with the tour, and you know, I think we are at risk if kids aren't having a good time. You know, at the age of 8, 9, that some of them might not have found that competitive buzz, or might not like the individual element. They might favour team events at that sort of age and develop a few years later. And I think if we don't cater for that, we are at risk of a child of 9 going, you know what, I don't like that feeling that tennis gave me. I want to go and try cricket or football or what other sport, whatever it might be. And I think the more we can nurture different ways of learning and enjoying at that age, then we are in a better position to kind of sustain more and keep more kids and parents in the game for that longer period.
Yep, agreed.
Just on the last question, conscious of your time. So I suppose to summarize the kind of topic we're talking about, nurturing competitors, that the environment and the game awareness that you talked about for the boys, that they were seeing sport, they were playing sport of, not just tennis, playing the games that they were involved in, football, golf, they were experiencing that kind of competitive edge, I suppose, from the environment they were in, and obviously them as individual personalities as well. You think those two were key aspects, I guess, going back on what you said earlier.
Yeah, they always enjoyed competing, and whether that was because they had parents and grandparents who were sporty, who would play with them whenever they wanted to play anything. But we always tried to teach them how to play the game. It wasn't like just, right, let's do this drill round these cones or something like that. If we did do a drill round cones, I'm talking with the football here, there would always be goals at the end of it, because that's the fun. And I think especially for boys, they love a target and they want to do what they see on TV. So it is really so much about using your imagination. And I think, if you see something, let's take the overhead in tennis, which, for little kids, that's usually the hardest thing, because in life, they don't really do much where they raise both arms above their head and look up. And I thought, right, okay, what will we do with this? And I thought, what mimics that shot? What mimics that movement? And that is a game. And it was piñata. So it was like, right, I create a piñata, cheap poly bag, ripped up pieces of paper and some wrapped sweets. and you hung it on on my tennis racket, and I held it high enough up that they would hit it at full stretch with, above their heads with the racket. Yeah. So they would run up and put a little line down or a garden cane, stop, I'd hold it up, and they'd whack it. And they soon learned that they had to whack it really pretty hard to break it to get the sweets out. But what it did was it brought in that full, load up, racket back above the head in a very simple way that the game did the teaching for me. Because when they're little, they don't want to know, left arm up, sideways on, tuck the racket, whatever it was. They don't want to listen to that, but find something that mimics what it is that you're trying to get them to do. And I use that a lot as a really good example of something that you could easily do that at home. And you could, if you cut a hole in a tennis ball and put a bit of rope with a knot through it and hang that on, they can run up and they can actually hit a tennis ball. You need to be quite careful that tennis ball doesn't run back and bump you, but that's really, what I would say is that, and right, how many shots until the sweets start to come out? How many sweets did you get? Who got the most sweets? Well, everything with them was a competition. I was
going to say that would make it pretty damn competitive, I think, when you put sweets or chocolate involved.
Yeah. And the thing is that wrapped sweets, I don't know, sort of Frutella type sweets that don't burst when you hit them. You need to be quite careful with what you put in there. I have learned over the years, but I think that's the thing. And I think when I start to show things like that to parents, and even stuff that you can do in the house with balloons, which cost next to nothing, they don't break your ornaments, and how many skills you can develop by inventing balloon type exercises in the house. It's it doesn't have to all be about coaching. It doesn't have to be all about traveling to something. There's so much that parents can do to help their kids to improve. And of course, the more they improve, the more success they have, the more they build their confidence, and the more they want to do it more. So but I think, my kids they love sport. I mean, the fact that they're still playing at 35 and 36 and still, fully committed, complete geeks about the games, speaks volumes about the importance of learning to love it from a young age, but also being in an environment where parents love it, grandparents love it, great club, etc., etc. These are all part and parcel of the journey. And especially at that 6 to 11 that we're talking about, is that if the first impressions are good, and the environment is good, and there is some elements of success and encouragement, you have a very good chance of keeping them in that sport for the long haul.
Judy, that's a great message to finish with there. So a big thank you to you, Judy, for joining us. This is the first of our Judy Murray's Parents Corner. It's going to do a once-a-month session with Judy. So parents, if having listened to this, if you feel there are certain topics or questions that are burning in your mind and you'd like to ask them, or a topic that you'd like us to cover over the coming months, then please drop me a line. The email address and website address will be with this video, so feel free to drop us a line and let us know the sort of topics you'd like us to cover. But a big thank you, Judy, for joining us for this first session, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.
That's a pleasure. Here's to many more.
Thanks, Judy.